I want to tell you about a young couple whose marriage was doomed to tragedy from the very beginning. The ending of this story will shock you no less than it did me when I first heard it from my colleagues. It all began in the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, located in the heart of America. This place is considered ideal for young people who aspire to start a family and raise children. It would seem that for Joshua and Amber, a young couple expecting their first child, Tulsa should have been a cozy nest where they could build their happy future. However, as often happens in life, reality turned out to be quite different. Amber, an 18-year-old high school graduate, was an excellent student and actively engaged in sports. She was a member of the Future Farmers of America Club, which demonstrated her determination and ambition. Amber had lived with her mother and stepfather in Tulsa since she was 5 years old. Joshua, a 22-year-old native of Tulsa, was also an outstanding athlete. Following in the footsteps of his father, a career officer, he decided to pursue a career in the U.S. Armed Forces. His brother Zach, also a military man, was undergoing training before being deployed to Afghanistan. From the outside, Amber and Joshua seemed like the perfect couple, an attractive girl and a handsome, charming pilot. It appeared that they had a bright and happy future ahead of them. Both had loving families and strong ties in the community. However, as a detective with many years of experience, I can say that appearances are often deceiving. Behind the perfect facade, serious problems and conflicts can lurk, which only intensify over time. Even I, a seasoned detective, was struck by what I heard next. For those who observed their relationship from the outside, everything seemed like a fairy tale. A young couple in love who, without wasting time, decided to get married. Just a few days before Joshua finished military technical school, on September 7, 2010, the couple tied the knot and threw a lavish celebration. However, reality turned out to be not so cloudless. Joshua received an assignment to serve in faraway Alaska, thousands of miles away from family and friends. Amber, as a devoted wife, followed her beloved without hesitation to a small town with a harsh climate and an unfamiliar way of life. She took on the task of setting up a new home and establishing a household, trying to create a cozy atmosphere for herself and her husband. But was this the only reason for the changes in Amber's behavior? Joshua's brother Zach began to notice that the girl seemed to be trying to escape from something, immersing herself in household chores. He also had a feeling that Amber, from the very beginning of their acquaintance, controlled Joshua and manipulated him. Zach even advised his brother to stay away from the girl. However, upon learning about Amber's problems in her family and her mother's poor treatment of her, Zach suggested that the girl had developed a difficult character. Perhaps that was why she was somewhat nervous and demanding. He hoped that the courtship, marriage, and relocation would benefit Amber and help her build a relationship with Joshua. But did these hopes come true? Unfortunately, neither the move to Alaska nor the wedding could fix the situation. On the contrary, it only worsened. From my experience as a detective, I can say that serious problems often lurk behind the perfect image. Excessive control by one of the partners, manipulation, attempts to escape from reality. All these are alarming signs that point to possible future conflicts. Unfortunately, those in love often ignore these signs, hoping that everything will work out on its own. But was there something in the case of Joshua and Amber that could have prevented the tragedy? Were there moments in their relationship when something could still be changed? Now, I will tell you about all this in detail, but only to those wonderful and incredible people who subscribe to the channel right now, like this video, and write any comments so that as many people as possible can see this video. Even I, a seasoned detective, was struck by what I heard next. I want to share with you some disturbing details that became known later on. Joshua, while on duty, often called his brother Zach and told him about Amber's strange behavior. At first, it was obsessive calls and complaints about loneliness, which Joshua regarded as a form of psychological and emotional pressure from her side. But the problems did not end there. Soon, Joshua confessed to his family that Amber had begun to show physical aggression. She beat him and threw various objects at him. Zach, trying to help his brother, advised him to contact the military police on the base and officially document these incidents. He understood that the situation was getting out of control and required intervention. One time, Joshua told Zach about a particularly horrific incident. Amber, in a fit of aggression, hit him with a lamp and pushed him down the stairs. He also mentioned that during their stay in Alaska, his wife developed a drug problem, which only worsened the already tense situation in the family. As a detective, I can say that substance abuse often becomes a catalyst for domestic violence. People lose control of themselves and resort to aggression, destroying not only their own lives, but also the lives of their loved ones. Eventually, the command of the unit where Joshua served sent the couple for counseling, trying to save their marriage. But it seemed to be too late. Less than 9 months passed, and the situation reached a critical point. Joshua was expelled from the military academy, and the couple was forced to return home. At that point, Amber was already pregnant. It would seem that this news should have brought the couple together, become an incentive for them to start from scratch. But unfortunately, this did not happen. Amber's mother settled them in an apartment on the 25th floor of a multi-story building, which became a witness to constant quarrels and mutual accusations. Unfortunately, as often happens, people hope until the very end that everything will work out on its own, without realizing the full seriousness of the situation. What I am about to tell you now will make you look at everything you have heard before in a different way. The fateful day had come when Joshua and Amber's relationship reached the point of no return. Despite the fact that Amber was in her 7th month of pregnancy, it seemed that this only added fuel to the fire of their constant conflicts. That day, another quarrel broke out between the couple, which quickly escalated into a fight. In the heat of emotions, they knocked over the television and broke the bedroom window. This was not just a conflict, but a real brawl that threatened not only their mental health, but also their physical safety. Interestingly, just 2 days before this, Joshua had filed a request for a protective order, trying to protect himself from his wife's aggression. But unfortunately, this document remained unnoticed, lost among other papers. The broken window could not go unnoticed. The owners of the building, upon learning about the incident, contacted the couple and informed them that they had to compensate for the damages. Armand Rosales and his team were called in for repairs. When the craftsman voiced the amount of $150, it only added fuel to the fire. Another argument broke out between Joshua and Amber. Joshua insisted that he could fix everything himself, trying to save money. But in the end, perhaps tired of constant quarrels, the couple still gave their consent to the repairs. During this time, Amber, consumed by anger, entered and exited the room several times. Her behavior clearly indicated an unstable emotional state and uncontrolled aggression. Meanwhile, Joshua's packed suitcases were already standing by the door. He had gathered his belongings, documents, even CDs, preparing to leave his wife. The day before, Joshua had called his father and arranged for help with the move. But due to his father's delay at work, the young man was forced to turn to friends for help. And now, my friends, a very important point. Creating this kind of content requires a considerable amount of time, and currently, my channel and I are experiencing financial difficulties. I would be immensely grateful if you could become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. In return, I will be able to personally respond to your comments and even mention your noble name in my video. So please consider becoming a sponsor. I will be endlessly thankful for your support. This scene vividly illustrates how tense and unhealthy the relationship of this couple was. Even pregnancy did not become a restraining factor or motivation for them to find common ground. Aggression, mutual offenses, and the desire to run away from problems instead of solving them, that's what characterized their marriage at that moment. In my opinion, there is a line when a conflict turns into something more than just a quarrel. And in this case, Joshua and Amber had long crossed that red line. If you thought that this story could no longer surprise you in any way, get ready to change your mind. While the couple continued to argue, Mr. Rosales, who was repairing the window, sent his assistant to the truck parked below for additional materials. Perhaps he just wanted to get away from this tense atmosphere and disputes for a while. Stepping out of the room into the corridor, Rosales began talking to a neighbor when suddenly he heard screams coming from the apartment. No, no, no. This was followed by the sound of rapid footsteps, a loud crash, and more screams. This cacophony of sounds did not bode well and indicated that the conflict between Joshua and Amber had gotten out of control. At the same moment, Rosales' assistant, who was already heading to the truck, heard the sound of breaking glass. Later in court, he would give stunning testimony. It was like in a movie. I saw this guy falling and heard him screaming, and so all the way down. Only a few seconds after that, Amber's face appeared in the broken window. This moment became a key point in the whole story. On the other side of the street, Robert Baker, who had just come out for a smoke, looked up at the sound of breaking glass and saw Joshua falling. Without wasting a second, he immediately called the rescue service, realizing the seriousness of the situation. Later in court, he would confirm that he saw the guy flying out of the window face forward. Meanwhile, Mr. Rosales returns to the apartment and comes upon a shocking scene: a broken window. Approaching closer, he looks outside, trying to understand what happened. Suddenly, Amber comes out of the room and starts screaming that her husband fell out of the window, that she pushed him. This confession stuns Rosales, and he instinctively feels fear to approach Amber, fearing that in a state of passion she might push him too. As a detective, I can say that such situations, unfortunately, are not uncommon. Domestic violence often leads to tragic consequences, especially when emotions take over reason. Amber's sincere confession immediately after the incident indicates that she may not have fully realized what she had done in a fit of anger. You will be stunned when you find out what happened next. I want to draw your attention to Amber's behavior immediately after the tragedy. Being in a state of shock, she tried to convince Mr. Rosales to go down with her to her fallen husband. Rosales agreed, but perhaps instinctively sensing danger, he led Amber to the lobby, not to the parking lot as she had asked. He even called the building manager to accompany the woman, while he himself stepped away to call the police and keep a safe distance from Amber. Rescuers, firefighters, and police quickly arrived at the scene. What they saw shocked even seasoned professionals. Amber was found next to her husband's mutilated body. She held his head, kissed him, and desperately begged everyone around for help. Later in court, firefighters would testify that Amber was screaming hysterically, begging them to save her husband at all costs, otherwise she would go to jail. One of them also noted that the woman was in such an unstable emotional state that they were even afraid that she might throw herself off the parking lot on the 8th floor. Unfortunately, it was too late for Joshua. The injuries sustained from the fall were incompatible with life. He died on the spot from a severe impact. While specialists worked at the scene of the tragedy, Amber called her grandmother and asked her to come to be with her. The police officer who was to accompany Amber to the downtown police station allowed her to wait for her grandmother. He led the woman to a part of the lobby, away from the gathering crowd of onlookers. Then the same officer drove Amber and her grandmother to the station in a patrol car. And it was during this trip that something very important happened. The police officer accidentally overheard Amber quietly confessing to her grandmother that it was she who had pushed Joshua, and because of that he fell out of the window. This confession would become a key piece of evidence in the subsequent investigation. I have encountered similar situations many times. Often, people who have committed a crime in a fit of passion then sincerely repent. They seem to not fully realize the reality of what happened and feel the need to speak out, even if it will harm them later on. At this stage, there were many questions swirling in my head. What exactly happened in that apartment? Did Amber really intentionally push Joshua? What was the relationship between the couple that led to such a tragic end? Prepare yourself for the fact that your emotions will be off the scale, because what happened next defies comprehension. As soon as Amber and her grandmother arrived at the police station, they were immediately taken to a special interrogation room. This room was equipped with everything necessary: recording devices, surveillance cameras, as well as basic items such as water and medicine. The police made sure to create the necessary conditions for conducting the interrogation and gathering information. Leaving the women alone, the officer entered the adjacent observation room. He understood that something important for the further investigation could be said now, so without wasting time, he turned on the recording. What happened next is difficult to describe in words. Amber seemed to have lost touch with reality. She began to talk to her grandmother, but her words resembled more of a delirium. "I shouldn't be here. Josh is dead and I'm here," she repeated over and over again. Amber was aware of the full tragedy of the situation, realizing that with her actions she had ruined not only her own life. "I didn't just lose my husband. Jean and Patrick lost their son, Zach lost his brother and his grandmother. Grandma has a bad heart, and she won't survive the news of her beloved grandson's death." These words are permeated with pain, fear, and despair. Amber seemed to be reliving everything again, recalling the smallest details. "I still don't remember holding his mutilated body and just looking at him." Such memories are capable of breaking even the strongest person, and Amber was already in an extremely unstable emotional state. Amber's grandmother, a wise woman with a wealth of life experience, understood that her granddaughter needed support and consolation now more than ever. She realized that if Amber continued to blame herself, it could lead to irreparable consequences. Therefore, the grandmother began to calm the girl down, saying that Joshua was now in God's hands. She tried to give Amber at least some foothold, something to hold on to in this terrible situation. In the conversation, Amber began to recall the time spent with her husband in Alaska. And here something very important was said. It turns out that when the couple was prescribed counseling sessions, one of the counselors let slip that if Amber and Joshua stayed living together, she would eventually kill him. This information sheds new light on the whole story. Were the counselor's words just an unfortunate statement, or was there something more behind them? As a detective, I understand that every detail, even the smallest one, can be crucial. Therefore, this mention of the counselor's words will definitely be taken into account during the investigation. We need to understand whether it was just a coincidence or whether someone might have foreseen the tragic end of this story long before its climax. During the conversation with her grandmother, Amber suddenly uttered a phrase that clarifies a lot in this complicated story. She said that if she had known what it would lead to, she certainly would not have pushed Joshua. These words sounded like a kind of confession, albeit an indirect one. Amber's grandmother, upon hearing this, immediately asked, "But you didn't push him on purpose, did you?" And right away, as if trying to fix the situation, she advised her granddaughter to say that it all happened accidentally. This moment is very important because it shows that even Amber's closest people understood how serious the consequences of her words could be. Further events unfolded around the confrontation between two families, Joshua's relatives and Amber's. Each side tried to defend their truth to protect their child. Joshua's family claimed that he had tried in every way to help Amber, to give her the opportunity to start a new life away from the toxic influence of her own parents. They believed that Joshua wanted his wife to overcome a harmful addiction, give birth to a healthy child, and enjoy motherhood. However, according to them, despite all her husband's efforts, Amber continued to use prohibited substances even during pregnancy, and also abused Joshua, knowing that he loved her too much to fight back. On the other hand, Amber's family blamed everything on Joshua. They claimed that he himself was cruel and allegedly had also been taking some substances lately, which is why he fell out of the window. This version was radically different from the one voiced by the relatives of the deceased. As you can see, dear viewers, the situation was extremely complicated. Two families, two truths, and each side defended their child to the last. In such cases, it is always difficult to figure out where the truth is and where there is an attempt to justify a loved one. The local police had to unravel this tangle of family contradictions, and although both versions deserved attention, the law enforcement officers had more trust in the testimony of Joshua's relatives. After all, Amber herself admitted that she had a hand in her husband's death. That is why she was officially charged with murder. But even at this stage, many questions remained. Was it a planned, cold-blooded murder? Or was that counselor right who warned that if Amber and Joshua stayed together, she would kill him sooner or later? At that time, there was no direct evidence of intentional murder. If you thought that this story could no longer surprise you in any way, get ready to change your mind. Considering all the evidence and eyewitness testimony, the investigation concluded that it was a second-degree murder, a crime committed in a state of strong emotional distress. Witnesses who were present in the apartment and those who saw Joshua fall out of the window told about the fierce quarrels of the couple that lasted throughout the day and eventually led to the tragedy. Everything indicated that a conflict had occurred between Amber and Joshua, which got out of control and had fatal consequences. From a legal point of view, Amber's actions were qualified as something between involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide. Her behavior during the interrogation and her own words indicated that she did not plan to kill her husband, but at the same time, her actions led to his death. Initially, Amber was released on bail as the defense began to build a line of defense and gather arguments in her favor. During this period, the woman gave birth to a boy, but unfortunately, motherhood did not keep her from further problems with the law. The conditions of Amber's stay at large before the trial were quite strict. She had to observe a curfew, constantly be under the supervision of her mother or grandmother. In addition, the woman was obliged to wear an electronic bracelet to track her movements. Amber also had to regularly submit urine tests and undergo examinations using a catheter to confirm that she was not using prohibited substances. However, as surveillance records show, Amber repeatedly violated the conditions of her release on bail. She missed the curfew or allowed her monitoring device to turn off at least 10 times. Surveillance agents also noted that Amber often asked to change her overnight location at the last minute. But the most alarming signal was that in 2 cases, traces of prohibited drugs were found in Amber's urine. There were also cases when her tests were so diluted that they could not be checked for the content of narcotic substances. All this indicated that Amber continued to lead a lifestyle that ultimately led to the tragedy. Eventually, due to regular violations of the conditions of detention, Amber was sent to the local prison pending trial. And here, even more shocking details became known. Other prisoners reported that when Amber was approached about her husband's death, she laughed and openly stated that it was she who killed the scumbag by throwing him out of the window. Of course, such testimonies required careful verification. After all, it is quite possible that these women, with whom Amber shared prison life, could distort her words or add something of their own. But in any case, this information could not be ignored by the investigation. The investigation of this case was a real challenge for everyone involved. It was necessary to gather together all the details, separate facts from rumors and emotions, and based on this, compile a clear picture of what happened. Ahead of us was a trial that was to put the final point in this tragic story. So, dear viewers, we have come to the end of this tragic story. But before putting a period on it, I want to draw your attention to some details that shed light on what happened to Amber after her arrest. Having found herself behind bars, it would seem that Amber should have reconsidered her actions and felt guilt for what she had done. However, as her cellmates testify, she continued to behave defiantly and even laughed when mentioning her husband's death. Moreover, Amber openly stated that it was she who killed Joshua by throwing him out of the window. But as soon as the woman found herself in the courtroom, her behavior changed dramatically. A completely different Amber appeared before the jury, quiet, frightened, claiming that she acted exclusively in self-defense. According to her version, Joshua attacked her, grabbed her by the shoulders, and she, defending herself, simply pushed him away. Allegedly, this is what led to the guy tripping over candlesticks and falling out of the window. However, the evidence gathered during the investigation cast doubt on the truthfulness of this testimony. A forensic medical examination showed that Joshua had suffered numerous injuries incompatible with life. He had broken legs, arms, ribs, sternum, and pelvis. In addition, serious damage to internal organs was found. At the same time, a toxicological analysis did not reveal any traces of alcohol or drugs in Joshua's body. Detectives also paid attention to the state of the crime scene. In the photographs, it is clearly visible that the massive candlesticks near the window stood motionless. There were no signs of a struggle or disorder in the room. This cast doubt on Amber's version that Joshua accidentally fell out of the window after tripping. And the window itself was unlikely to break so easily after all. The building was erected back in 1966, and the glass in it was not tempered, as in modern high-rises. Amber's defense twice tried to make a deal with the prosecution, offering her to plead guilty in exchange for a mitigated sentence. But the woman stubbornly refused to compromise, insisting on her version of events. In the end, this played against her. The jury only needed 3 hours to find her guilty of second-degree murder. Amber was sentenced to 25 years in prison and a hefty fine. In addition, the court ordered her to pay for her husband's funeral expenses. The woman filed an appeal, claiming that her lawyer did not defend her interests well enough, but the higher court left the verdict unchanged. It would seem that the story should have ended there. But already in prison, Amber suddenly expressed a desire to talk to journalists. She gave an interview to the BBC, appeared on the Dr. Phil show, and later gave written consent for an interview with a local TV studio. However, this meeting never took place because the next day after Amber sent the letter, she was found dead in her cell. As the examination showed, the woman committed suicide by hanging herself with an electrical cord. Relatives and friends refused to believe that Amber could have committed suicide. As proof, they cited the same letter in which she agreed to an interview. However, during the autopsy, traces of self-harm were found on the woman's body, cuts on her wrists and forearms, and toxicology showed the presence of drug and antidepressant residues in her blood. So the version of suicide, unfortunately, looks quite probable. This tragic story left no one indifferent, neither Joshua and Amber's relatives, who still mourn their children, nor the little boy who was left without parents due to the cruelty of adults, nor all of us who witnessed these terrible events. I want to believe that this story will serve as a warning to others, that people who find themselves in toxic and dangerous relationships will not be afraid to seek help. After all, there is always a chance for salvation as long as you are alive and ready to fight. And the responsibility for domestic violence is always borne by the abuser, regardless of whether it is a man or a woman. Thank you for being with us, and take care of yourself.